Hey everyone. So earlier this month, there was a story circulating around CBC Edmonton about this woman who was fat shamed by a store employee. And while the story itself was pretty bad, what I was more concerned about was some of the comments that people were making about her. People are calling her lazy and stupid and telling her that if she didn't want people to make comments about her, she should lose weight. And for me, what was so shocking is that she made a point of mentioning that she was living with epilepsy and that it had resulted in her having issues with her weight because of some of the side effects. And it was also shocking for me because we are living in 2016, and some of the comments that she was hearing are comments that I heard, 10 years ago when I was a kid. And it's pretty frustrating when you're just trying to live your life and people decide to make comments about you based on something that is ultimately none of their business. Um, and for me, being fat has meant living a life where I'm ultimately having to address a lot of misinformation about, my size or what my life must be like or how happy I am. And so today I want to address some of these myths and hopefully get you thinking about some of the ways in which you might inherently or accidentally maybe perpetuating them, and how you can maybe talk to people about these myths and how they affect you. Um, so first of all, not everyone who is overweight got that way because of poor eating and exercise habits, and this is something that we are seeing constantly. It is the main message we receive when we're talking about being overweight or having obesity. And it's important to recognize that the body is a complex machine, and there are several other reasons why someone may end up getting weight that might not have anything to do with their eating and exercise habits. So, genetics, underlying medical conditions, side effects from medication, social determinants of health. Um, these are all things that have the ability to affect your weight, and some of them do affect your eating and exercise habits, but for the most part, that shouldn't be the only reason that we automatically go to when we think of why someone might be overweight. In fact, Mike.com wrote a really great article about fat myths, and I'll link it below. They pointed out that making assumptions about a person's habits around foods can actually, trigger people who might actually do have some issues with food, which doesn't help anyone and ultimately makes you look like a dick. Um, And it's also important to remember that there are thin people out there who do have poor eating and exercise habits and, may actually be struggling with some of the same conditions that people who are overweight are struggling. And yet most of the focus is paid to people who are overweight. So it's really important to think about that as well. And that also leads into the idea that being fat doesn't necessarily mean that you're unhealthy, just like being skinny doesn't necessarily make you automatically healthy. Um, and in fact, a really good review of research studies that looked at the relationship between weight and health. It was published in Social and Personality Psychology Compass in 2013. They found that all across all of the studies, there were minimal improvements in health outcomes with weight loss, and none of which were actually correlated with weight change. Um, and their study is not the only study that looks at this, and in fact, research continues to demonstrate that much of the myths that we think about when we think about weight and health might not be entirely true. And while it is true that there are conditions which can be exacerbated by weight gain, such as type 2 diabetes and heart disease, it's also important to again remember that people who are skinny are also receiving diagnoses for these diseases and are also capable of leading sedentary and unhealthy lifestyles. Um, it's also important to remember that dieting can have really detrimental effects to the body. And in fact, Dr. Arya Sharma of the Canadian Obesity Network did a really great TED Talk on this, and I'll link that below as well. And now, having said all this about weight and health, it's also finally important to remember that people who are fat don't always want to be thin. They don't always want to lose weight. And they are capable of living really happy and really fulfilling lives. Um, Besides being a really asinine assumption to make about somebody's life, this assumption also comes from the fact that we don't really see a lot of media representation of people who are fat and are living really happy, healthy lives. Studies continue to show that media representation of fat people often makes them out to be bad, unintelligent, antisocial, unloving, not compassionate, and essentially associated with all these negative traits and qualities that aren't necessarily true. And I think the most pointed representation of this that we all maybe have seen before is Monica Geller in Friends, where her previous issues with weight, and I would even argue her current issues with her weight, are seen as this kind of dark part of her past that she doesn't want to talk about, and is also something that her friends make fun of her for. So Monica Geller really needs to get a new set of friends. Um, it's also important to recognize we're living, in this society where people who are fat are making really amazing contributions to our lives and our culture. And we don't see them because we haven't accepted the fact that people who are fat are also human beings. And unfortunately, this is something that continues to happen, as I'm sure that women in our deans would know, and something that I know as well. So that's all I have for you today, and I hope that you all are having a wonderful long weekend. I know people in Newfoundland and Quebec are not celebrating this holiday, so I hope that Monday hasn't been too horrible to you, and I will see you guys next week.